Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Sojourning Writer. Today we're going to be taking a look at what we learned on Tuesday and try to apply it to an old piece that I have. This is one of my old work in progresses that I did a couple years back, but haven't been working on it a lot recently. So I have pretty much all the work that I've done on this book saved. So this allows me to pull back and take a look at some of the stuff that I've worked previously without having to worry about how things have been going recently. So, we're also going to be taking a look at some of the things, and I'm going to be pulling directly from Tuesday's video and seeing what we can, if we can notice some of the wordiness things that they are suggesting in the book. So let's get into it. Oh, well, yeah, it's either that or walk all the way to the woods. Now, this is a very weird way of saying this, and if we take a look at different things we can see, already understood, no. The empty, no. Redundant, the impassive, the weak, non-committal, the affected, the overindulgent, the invisible, therefore unnecessary, the imprecise. Yeah, this is kind of the same way that we have the weak, the passive. This is a very passive way of saying these things. Or we're talking about, this is dialogue, but are we saying the thing that the character wants to say in the way that the character is saying it? And what I mean by that, are we actually talking, or are we having the character talk in a way that is actually indicative of the character's personality? Because you got to remember that it's not just that we're talking about how getting the information across by the character's point of view, but rather is the character speaking in the way that fits them. And this is how we help us create voice for each individual characters. The ultimate goal of our characters is when we are writing them correctly, it doesn't take a lot for our readers to understand, hey, this is the guy that's talking, and not have any sort of indication via dialogue tags or other things that this is the actual person who's talking. Now, this is obviously not going to necessarily be the same for every character, because you could have different characters that are going to pop up, and some are going to have higher presences in your book, or they're going to have a higher presence in your book than, say, others. And that's going to flow, and that's going to rotate, and that's going to change throughout the story. So the thing is that we need to keep in mind that our main characters, say whatever the big five are, whatever that looks like, the five main characters of your story, they all might not be the protagonist, they might not be the antagonist, they might be side people that show up in and out, but these are the people that have a higher percentage of the dialogue in your story. So say you take the top percentage. So if your main character has 20% of the dialogue, what the next ones have? If you get anything down below 10% of the complete dialogue of the story, it doesn't necessarily matter how their voices show up. Anything below 10%, I would even say chances are you're going to have very few people that are actually going to be above even 5% when it comes to how much dialogue that they're going to have in your story. So that this is something that can help us simplify what's going on. We don't have to worry about side characters. We don't have to worry about people that show up. Like, you have guys that are, they pop in and out. Those are what would be considered non-playable characters in video games. People that don't have a whole lot of impact on the plot beyond purely progressing it, but they're not actually having agency in how they interact with the world or with your readers. Not to say that you shouldn't be giving these people as much agency as possible, because the mindset that we should be having for our side characters is that they are the main characters of their own story. Now, this is going to be true pretty much for every form of storytelling, that our side characters aren't just non-playable characters, but the fact that we are allowing them to have agency in their own lives, at least how we are picturing them to have agency in their own lives. I understand that we're talking a little bit of metaphysical here, but we want to make sure that we're allowing our characters to have agency, or have a feeling that they have agency in their own lives. So, oh yeah, it's either that or walk all the way to the woods. Now, this might seem a little weird, because we're cutting in a little bit for what's the situation here. We're jumping in a little bit into the wood. The thing is that we want to make sure that I don't want to go back and rehash stuff that we've already talked over. So I started off a little bit later in that chapter. So what would be a way that we could say this? So one of the ways we could tighten this up and literally say, where you could walk so we've essentially cut everything out except for 4 words. This whole thing, this is a way that we can make it very fast, very snippy. And depending on what's going on with the character, Stephen is the main character in this scene, that he's talking about, hey, or you could just walk. We're cutting out everything that needs to be said. From that point on, Stephen watched his footing. As they neared the inner gate, Stephen began to sweat. I'll stay here as long as I lose some. I'll stay here well, if I stay here long, I'm sure to lose some of this weight. Why is this needed? This is easily something that can be cut. It doesn't need to be here at all, because we've already talked about earlier about him having extra weight. This doesn't need to be here, so we can cut this. As they entered the inner court, remember, looks like we're in a present tense here. You always want to make sure that we're talking in the same tense throughout the story. So this is more of a present tense. What we want to change this is when they entered the inner court. Now this is a past tense. Could see. Men at arms. So this is redundant. We don't need this at all. We'll go back to the imprecise, the nonsensical, the invisible, and therefore unnecessary. These are, or the redundant really, is what we're going to be seeing, what we see here. See, men at arms drilling in the corner. Literally, you can cut this completely out, and you would see when they entered into the inner courtyard, men at arms were drilling in one corner, where men at arms were drilling in one corner and archers were practicing another. We don't need to say, hey, this guy saw this happening. But as soon as they turned to look at the group that walked in, this isn't really necessary. We can add this into what Stephen is feeling. We don't want to show, hey, this is what's going on with this character. We want to make sure that we're having a very specific way of making that we're seeing this through Stephen's eyes and how they're feeling and how this person is feeling. Yes, we're talking about the group that came in. We're kind of changing the perspective when we do this. So we could literally change this to say something along the lines of, as Stephen made his way across the courtyard, all the eyes turned to him. We're staying in Stephen's point of view. We're staying in a point of view where the main character is the filter that we're experiencing everything else that's going on around him. Come this way, the king would like to have a look at you as soon as possible. Now, are we is this, we also need to make sure that we're paying attention to who's saying what. So if this is Stephen that's talking, then why are we having another person? Because this is clearly not Stephen who's saying this. So you need to make sure that you're paying attention to that. As they moved from Stephen forgot his fear and became enraptured with the castle itself. This is a longer word that we really don't need. That there are other ways of saying something like this. So we could literally say something along the lines of the courtyard held Stephen's attention as they moved to the castle. The keep, really. It's not necessarily a castle because the whole thing would be considered a castle, but as they're moving towards the keep, it's as they move to the keep, the courtyard is keeping Stephen's attention. His fear scratching the back of his head. We're not necessarily talking about that he's forgotten it, but this is his scratching. There's a annoyance here. There's a almost like you hear a scratching on the door. That kind of fear is kind of the way we are saying this is hey, the main character is feeling fear, but he's feeling fear, and we want to give that visceral reaction, that unsettlingness with what's going on. So this is another way of saying the same thing. As a child, he always wanted to see, but his family didn't have the money for a trip like that. Over the years, he had forgotten his childhood desire. As he ran his hand along the stone, the passageway, it was like he was a boy once again. Again, all of this can be simplified. All of this is a way it is for the he was a child again. Reliving those nights. He pretended to be when he was alone. We're kind of summing up what's going on here. We're implying that he's reliving this, and he's reliving this whole situation. So it's a way that we are showing the character, and we're adding a little bit more depth to what's going on for the character. And that's the goal, is to say, hey, we are doing things that the character, we're showing more about the history of the character. And this is a very telling way of saying it. And if you remember in a previous video, that we don't want to necessarily just tell, but we also want to show. And there's a lot that we can do to both show and cut down on wordiness. We're allowing our readers to read the situation or see the situation through the main character. For that long for adventure to rescue the damsel in distress made his spirit soar with giddiness. We can take this and say, hey, when he was alone. Could save princess one and true love. We're talking about we've cut down that sentence, and it's now we're just showing our readers a little bit more about his thing, because we're talking about this from his perspective, and we're talking about things from how he is interacting with the world, her one and true love. And with this kind of making the forefront of while he was saving the princess, this gives us a hint, a little bit more about his mindset and what his ultimate goals are. So these are just some of the ways that we can say, hey, we're going to talk about ways of cutting down the wordiness and condensing what we're trying to say and distill what we're trying to say so that we get more of the impact, and then flavoring some of that extra layers into there so that we can make sure that our readers are actually getting more than just the situation. We want to paint a picture. We want to have our readers feel the visceral reactions and understand what's going on with our main characters. All right, so that's all I had for today. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave a comment below. All right, bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in